So what did we learn with UFC 245's main event? Well, the first thing I learned is I absolutely want to see a rematch. I don't know if I want to see the rematch right away, but I certainly feel they're going to go at it one more time. It was a good fight. Was the stoppage warranted? They could have allowed it to continue, absolutely. You see it all over the place as to what could have happened if they continued, because a lot of people had it 3. Some people had it 3-1 Covington. Some people had it 2 rounds apiece, which obviously then that means Usman's getting the 3rd round. Others had a 3-1 Usman, so that meant he was winning the fight regardless. It's a very interesting fight. I know people are divided on how they want to see this go down. I know it was an excellent fight, one of the best welterweight title fights I've ever seen. Obviously, there's some other huge ones with Lawler and McDonald, what George St. Pierre brought to the table, but still a very good fight nonetheless. I think we should need to see it again, but honestly, right now, I think Usman versus Masvidal would be a great next fight, and I think Woodley-Covington would make sense as well. I think, and of course, the guy that I feel for is Leon Edwards. What happens to Leon Edwards in the mix? Masvidal should get the next shot most likely. Covington gets a win; he gets back in there as well. Who's Edwards left with? And I know they talk about Edwards Woodley in London, but Woodley's saying he's not going to fight in London, so maybe we go Covington. Edwards in London would be a very interesting fight, but Covington's got to recover. He's got a broken jaw. The guy's tough as fuck. You might not like him. You got to respect him. He brought a hell of a fight to the cage, and I know a lot of you were backing him, and some people were pretty boisterous about their support for him, which is fantastic, but honestly, it came down to the better man won that matchup. Nonetheless, we keep rolling forward, and we are headed towards the final event of 2019. Welcome back to Kamikaze Overdrive MMA Predictions. Always, I am your host, Scott Johnson, and on this episode of the show, we are breaking in the upcoming UFC Fight Night 165, which will go down in Busan, South Korea on December 21st. Which is the Saturday. Now, it's a morning event. The prelims start at 2 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, 5 a.m. Eastern Standard Time for the main card, which is kind of interesting to see the final card play out like this. Kind of a little disappointing, but either way, I guess we get the McGregor one mid-January. We get a big break after this. We get several weeks off, pretty much a month off between UFC events, which is almost unheard of in this day and age. We get a pretty good main card event. I'm coming off a pretty shitty showing. I went 5 and 8 at the last event. I had a couple fights where it started off really well and things just fell apart. Fighters didn't finish, fighters didn't execute, and they lost as a result. Now in 2019, I have 291 fights won in 2019. My goal is to finish the year with 300. I know I fell short last year. I needed 7 for the final event. I got 3. Looking at this final card, we have 13 fights. I need to get 9 of those correct. That's definitely doable. Can I get over 300? We'll see. Either way, we're going to put forth our best effort and see what we can come up with. As I mentioned, I tweeted about, I'm looking to streamline a couple of things with my show and my website. We'll see how what that does. One of the things I'm planning to do is stop designing the posters I put together. Again, I really enjoy it. I actually really like carving out the fighters out of various images and designing them up and making them kind of my own little creation. But again, that's time consuming. I just don't have that type of time to commit to this, and I want to commit more to actually breaking down fights and producing good results. So we'll see what things I come up with when we come back in 2020. Again, the bet packs will be for sale for $15. I don't know. They traditionally don't do as well as far as sales are concerned for these events because of the time frame, but I will do my best to get them out there as quickly as possible. All my preliminary picks will be available at kamikazeoverdrive.net. And on that note, let's get to our first main card prediction. Fight number 1 of the prelims goes down in the UFC's Bantamweight division as Mr. Perfect Kang Ho Kang, 15-8-0 with 1 no contest, battles Team Alpha Male member Pingyuan. Again, I'm probably butchering that, with current record 13 wins and 5, actually count it 6 defeats. UFC.com does not update their records very well. Now, Pingyuan is 2-1 in the UFC, coming off a knockout loss against Jonathan Martinez. He had won 9 in a row prior to the defeat. Kang's won back-to-back fights and 5 of 6. Including a split decision versus Brandon Davis last time out. In that span, his only loss was a split decision loss to Ricardo Ramos. Now, again, Kang, I've heard it both. Kang, 3 inches taller, 1 inch reach advantage. Leo is the younger fighter by 6 years. Now, Kang's first fight, this is his first fight in Korea in the UFC. His first fight since 2012, fighting at home. So that's a big deal for him. A lot of pressure, a lot of expectations. Certainly should be motivated. For Pingyuan, That's his Team Alpha Male product. He won a split decision against Martin Day in his last victory in a fight where he was outlanded nearly 2-1. He gave up 100 significant strikes to 55 for Day, but he used his pressure to overcome the volume. Constant forward pressure to really back down Day and get the victory in that. But again, the Martinez fight, he actually had trouble with that. Martinez was pushing forward, and he had very little Liu had very little response to Martinez's forward pressure and just couldn't back him up. Spent the majority of the fight on his back foot, not as active on the feet, and ultimately got knocked out. It was the second knockout loss of his career. He's also been submitted 3 times, finished in 5 of his 6 defeats, which is not overly encouraging, but it's worth noting 4 of those defeats came in the first 4 pro fights of his career, so he certainly turned himself around since that 0-4 start. Now for Kang, physically larger man, a very big bantamweight, very strong bantamweight. Even against a former featherweight in Brandon Davis, he looked pretty big in that fight. Takedowns have been a big part of his attack. He's taken on all one of his UFC opponents, counting for 16 takedowns for 8 fights at a 64% completion rate. He has 11 wins by submission, including a couple in the UFC, so very impressive that way. Now, Brandon Davis did land 77 significant strikes, which was able to negate some of the takedown success and put Kang in a bad spot where it ended up being a very close fight, ultimately a split decision. I'm not sure Liu can replicate those numbers and put us in a spot like that. Now, again, Liu's work at ATT could help him to avoid the takedowns, but also Kang he's still very good at bringing that type of pressure that he seems to have trouble with. Pushing forward, his striking has improved significantly, and putting hands on him and just simply being the more active and aggressive fighter. Ultimately, I think Mr. Perfect's going to put together a strong performance at home, mix together his strikes and takedowns. Eventually, he'll get to a spot where he has a better position to finish the fight, and my prediction is Kyung Kang to defeat Liu Pingyuan by submission. In the UFC's middleweight division, Canada's Marc-Andre Power Bar Barriault, 11-3-0, takes on the Iron Turtle Jung Park, 10-3-0. Park fighting out of South Korea, so he will be the hometown favorite. Now, looking at this matchup, Barriault's 0-2 in the UFC after a split decision loss to Christophe Jotko. He's had 2 grinding decision fights where he simply just didn't do enough to win those matchups. For Park, he fell via submission to Anthony Hernandez in his debut back in August. His first loss was 2016. Now, for Barriault, he's 3 inches taller, he'll have a 1-inch reach advantage, and he's the older man by a year. Now, Park's a striking-based fighter with solid boxing. Against Hernandez, he was landing solid combinations. He was doing a lot, having a lot of success early in that fight. His short-range boxing combinations are quite nice. He was hurting Hernandez on the inside, forcing him to look for takedowns and really try and get the fight off the feet as quickly as possible. 5 of his 10 wins have come by knockout, some pop in his hands overall. It's interesting that all 3 of his submission wins have come in the first round, where of his 5 knockout wins, only 1 in the opening round. So it seems like he wears guys down to the feet and eventually gets the finish later in the bout. Now, he does have good long fight experience, which is nice. He's demonstrated he can carry his offensive output deeper into matchups. Now, his takedown defense, it wasn't terrible, but it wasn't amazing in that matchup. He was more apt to scramble up after being taken down than defend outright, but he still got himself into some trouble. Now, similar to Park, Barriault, I think he'll benefit from a fighter that wants to strike with him and slug it out on the feet as opposed to go to the ground. That being said, Barriault did land a takedown early against Jotko. Now, he couldn't hold him down, couldn't keep him down, and again, that would be a divergence from his traditional path to victory, which I don't like traditionally. I don't like fighters who have to go out of their comfort zone to win fights. It's just not a good look for the majority of them. Now, Barriault has some power. Ultimately, he wants to create a brawl. Go to work, land big shots. Against Sanchez, he was backing him up on multiple occasions in his debut, but just not throwing enough at times to consistently win the round. Now, he had some success in the clinch with dirty boxing, went after the body a little bit, worked elbows and uppercuts through the guard. So again, that's where he wants to be mixing it up, trading on the inside. But again, also Park thrives in that scenario. Now, he did struggle with the pressure of Jotko, wasn't active enough to push him back. Now, it's interesting to know that Barriault has never fought outside of Canada, so this is a big trip for him going to South Korea, stepping outside of his home domain for the very first time. Now, Park lost at home in his UFC debut, so he'll be motivated to get a victory here and to put on a strong performance against a foreign fighter coming in. This should be a striking-based fight for the most part. Barriault might need to step outside of his comfort zone again to grapple, which again is not something I like. If you are forcing yourself to fight in an area that you're not comfortable with, that's probably not a good thing. If you're on plan B or C, that's certainly not what you want to be doing. Park, I think he's going to land some good short-range counterboxing as Barriault pushes forward, use his pressure against him. He'll use volume. It could be a very close fight. It could be one of those matchups where in Canada it might go to Barriault. In South Korea, we got to favor the home fighter. So my prediction is Jung Park to defeat Marc-Andre Barriault by decision. Fight number 3 goes on in the UFC's light heavyweight division as the 12-2-0 Da Jung takes on the 10-4 Slow Mike Rodriguez. Now, Young made a successful debut against Khadis Ibrahimov, winning by third-round submission, his 11th straight victory coming into the UFC. Very impressive. For Rodriguez, he lost to Jean Alenarte in an upset. He is now 1-2 inside the octagon. Now, both guys are 6'4", so very tall men for the division. 4-inch reach advantage for Rodriguez, though. Jung is the younger man by 5 years. Now, looking at Rodriguez first, he's coming off a fight where he started very strong and then gassed out, fell apart, and dropped a decision to a fighter that widely was expected to be somebody he defeated. Similar to his debut against Devin Clark, where again he was expected to knock Clark out, didn't really get it going, got tired, and really never got it going and lost the decision. The constant theme is he hasn't been able to maintain his offensive attack over a full 3 rounds. He tends to slow down. He's not as dangerous. He's easier to hit. He's easier to take down. He's 2-3 outside of round number 1. We're 8-1 inside the opening frame. 0-3 in decision. So those numbers are indicative of the type of fighter I've been describing to you. Now for Jung, he survived an early onslaught against Ibrahimov, who's not a great fighter by any stretch of the imagination, but he was super aggressive. Jung showed a lot of composure, waiting for him to slow down, and eventually submitted him. He has 4 first-round wins, but he has 8-0 outside of the opening frame. And these numbers are important when I'm comparing these two guys as to where they thrive. And he's never been knocked out as well. He's relatively durable, and he showed that against Ibrahimov. Now, when Milstead fought and lost to Rodriguez, it really blew up Mike Rodriguez's stock because he's just a big, physical-looking guy, and he blasted another opponent who's a former heavyweight in such fashion that really made him, appear to be much more impressive than I think he is overall. He's got a decent striking game, but he's got a limited window in which to deploy it and to find success with it. And again, Jung didn't impress me that much in that fight beyond his durability and just composure, but he did enough in that matchup to suggest he's in a good spot here. He's certainly scrappy enough to hurt Rodriguez when trading, and he could opt to take him down, something that the last guy, the Brazilian, had a lot of success with against Rodriguez. Jung has shown enough he's capable on the mat, even especially against a tired opponent. He certainly could capitalize on it there. We also have to keep taking the fact that Jung's fighting at home. He's fighting in Brazil. That's massive implications as well for Rodriguez, who's traveling. And if you're a guy with poor cardio and now you're forcing your body to fight at a different time, it's going to affect how you deploy your energy reserves, how you're able to maintain your output. And if you're already a guy who struggles with that under the best conditions, this is not ideal conditions for him. Rodriguez needs to come out here looking for a big finish early on. And he might start strong overall, but I think he's going to fade, and Jung's going to take over and grind him down. The line has been very interesting. Rodriguez opened at plus 300, plus 400, and then got bet down significantly to the point where he's actually the favorite now, which is quite interesting. And again, he's more known to most fans. Ultimately, I think it's a bad matchup for him unless he can get the finish in the first 5 minutes. My prediction is Dooho Jung to defeat Mike Rodriguez by submission. In the UFC's featherweight division, the Korean Superboy Dooho Choi returns to action with a current record of 14 wins and 3 losses as he takes on another Canadian fighting on the card, Charles Air Jourdain. Nice name on him. Jourdain coming into this match with a record of 9 wins and 2 defeats. Now, Choi has lost back-to-back fights to Cub Swanson and Jeremy Stephens, 2 of the upper echelon gatekeepers of the division. He started his UFC run 3-0 with 3 knockouts, took some big step up in competition, ultimately put on great fights, but didn't come out victorious in either one of those matchups. For Jourdain, he debuted against Desmond Green, losing a decision. He had won 4 in a row on the regional scene. Choi is 1 inch taller, have a 1 inch reach advantage. Jourdain is the younger man by 4 years. Dooho has not fought in the UFC for 2 years, so he's been out of action for quite a while. Now, the Canadian is primarily a striker, Muay Thai, and kickboxing. 6 wins by knockout. He does have a trio of submissions coming, I think, earlier in his career, I believe. He's 0-2 in the scorecards, but he only has 3 first-round finishes, so longer fights don't appear to be an issue, just haven't gone his way on the cards when he goes that long. Now, for Choi, he has 11 wins by knockout, 9 in the first round. Very impressive that way. 2-2 in decisions, plus he has his knockout loss. Jeremy Stephens worked in there as well. Now, when you look at the Korean's record, he's 5-3 outside of the opening round. He's capable of winning under the right circumstances when the fights go beyond the first round, but again, all of his career losses have come outside of the first 5 minutes, which tells you that when he gets extended, and if his opponents can extend him, they have a better chance of picking up the victory, as both Cub Swanson and Jeremy Stephens demonstrated. Now, against Stephens, he had a strong start, arguably won the first round, but he faded in round 2 and was finished. Really struggled with the pressure of Stephens, didn't know how to back him off. He looked good early against Cub Swanson, but again, that fight got into a brawl. It broke down a little bit, and Swanson, just the veteran savvy and ability to deal with pressure in that big limelight, and Choi wasn't able to. It was a great fight, but Swanson did what he had to do to win that matchup. Now, with Choi, he seems to either get into a brawl and it takes away from his patient striking and deploying of his power, or he simply can't deflect when his opponent's not being intimidated by him and is pressuring forward offensively. He backs straight up a little bit, he eats some strikes, and he just gets a little bit flustered and just not as aggressive. It's also worth noting the loss against Swanson came in Canada. His loss against Jeremy Stephens came in the United States. His only other fight prior to that was outside of Asia, was a win in his UFC debut in the States. So it's worth noting that he has fought primarily in the home region where he's been successful, where he's returning to here. He's actually 0-2 fighting in Korea itself. The last time he fought was in 2015 against Sam Cecilia. As he said, most of his fights have been in Japan. Now, it's worth noting with Choi, he's a very talented fighter, but the 2 years away obviously is a concern, but at the same time, it's 2 years of him getting older, more mature, more experienced, and that can help a fighter who's got talent, just needs a better mindset in which to handle that talent and that skill. He's got big fight experience to draw upon from the Swanson and Stevens fights, and now he's fighting at home. Those are all positives for Choi. Now, for Jourdain, he, has that debut under his belt, but he's fighting overseas, which is very tough for him, or could be very tough for him. Jourdain offers a style that works very well with Choi's style. He's not willing to brawl. He'll stand and trade. He likes to strike it out. He's not going to shoot for a lot of takedowns. Jourdain's got a good track record outside the first round, so if he can extend Dooho Choi beyond round 1 into rounds 2 and 3, maybe he gets a little bit tired out for having not been in the cage for a couple of years. That certainly could be to the Canadians' advantage. I don't anticipate that happening. I think Choi, again, he's going to be amped to be fighting at home. He's going to mix it up, and I think he returns to the his winning ways. My prediction is Dooho Choi to defeat Charles Jourdain by knockout. In the co-main event of the evening, we're in the UFC's light heavyweight division as former title challenger Volkan No Time Oezdemir, ranked 8th in the division, 15 wins, 4 losses, takes on the 10th ranked Aleksandar Rakic with a current record of 12 wins and 1 loss. Rakic, of course, fighting out of Austria. Volkan Oezdemir fighting out of Switzerland. Now, Rakic is undefeated in the UFC, 12 straight wins overall since his pro debut. He lost his pro debut and has since come a long way. 4-0 inside the octagon. He's had a nice escalation of competition, and Oezdemir representing that next step up. For Volkan, coming off a Latifi knockout after a trio of losses to Daniel Cormier for the title, obviously, and then Anthony Smith and Dominic Reyes, 4-3 inside the UFC. Now for Rakic, he's 2 inches taller with a 3-inch reach advantage, and he's the younger fighter by 3 years. Now Oezdemir simply is becoming that guy that the UFC seems to throw out there to test prospects and contenders. He fought Misha Serkinov beat him. Then we had the title shot for Oezdemir coming in shortly after that. But then he lost to both Anthony Smith and Reyes. Smith went on to fight for the title. Reyes is up next to fight for the title. Rakic could be up next. With Johnny Walker going down like he did in the Corey Anderson fight and nobody clamoring to see Corey Anderson fight for the title, Rakic could be next in line to compete for the championship if he gets an impressive victory here. Now, for Volkan, he's coming off his most complete performance to date. Solid striking, solid defense, decent counter wrestling, did it all, got the finish. When you look back at his other performances, it's really been a tale of 2 different fighters. Ugly debut against OSP that he arguably lost. Short notice, we'll give him a break on that. Quick knockouts of Serkinov and Manawa, then dominated by Daniel Cormier. He looked better against Smith, but gassed out and got finished. Looked better against Reyes, slowed down, lost a split decision that I actually felt Oezdemir won, even though I picked Reyes in that matchup. Against Ilir Latifi, though, he looked patient, didn't overextend himself. The jab worked very nicely. He didn't load up on his punches. He mixed in knees and low kicks, a lot of variety, and just fought within himself and put together a great performance. He has the type of power to finish, but he needs to be mindful of not going too hard and trying to find the knockout when it's not necessarily there to be had. If his opponents can push him and force him out of that comfort zone, that's when he might get himself into some trouble. That's something we should look at here. Now, looking at Aleksandar Rakic next, he put together a complete performance against Justin Ledet. Takedowns and heavy top control with good ground and pound. He landed hard combinations on the feet, followed by the shooting in, taking him down, again, prolonged time on top, and certainly doing some damage from the position. Now, it's interesting to know with Rakic, he's actually had the opposite of Oezdemir. He's had longer fights early in his UFC career, and now he's been getting to the quick stoppages, which is something that kind of dominated his regional run. Now, when he fought Devin Clark, which was a crazy 5 minutes of fighting, slightly under 5 minutes of fighting, he was dropped by a left hook early. He was in trouble. He showed a lot of heart and composure to recover in that matchup. Clark eventually gassed out, trying to get him out of there. It got sloppy, got finished. And that's one thing you have to be very mindful of, is that maybe Rakic can be hurt. He's the type of guy who can be injured, but again, don't go all out because he's difficult to get out of that matchup, and that's Oezdemir needs to be mindful of that. Now, for Volkan, he fought both Dominic Reyes and Anthony Smith, who are physically similar to Rakic. Guys with similar height, similar reach. In those fights, he maintained decent pressure. His takedown defense was relatively solid for the most part, but his offensive numbers dipped as he went deeper into the matchup. And that allowed both those fighters to get back into it as he tired and slowed down. It would appear against Latifi, who, again, shorter fighter, different physical fighter, fit from a physical standpoint, but it looked like he had figured out what works for him. I like what I saw in that matchup from Oezdemir. And he's a fighter I really critique very significantly because I'm not a huge fan of him, but I feel like he's making strides in the right direction. He's learning to fight longer matchups without gassing out and still remaining dangerous. That's crucial. Rakic doesn't have a ton of long fight experience. Of his 13 career fights, only 4 have gone out to the first round. 3 in round 3, and only 2 since 2015. So that tells you he's not exactly a guy who is guaranteed to go start to finish and just maul you without a drop-off in performance. I don't like the way Devin Clark, who's an undersized guy who fought at middleweight, was able to get in and smash Rakic on the feet early in that matchup. Oezdemir is the type of guy, he hits harder, he's closer in size, so it's not going to be as big a deal for him to reach and make that connection. And Rakic, his striking defense appears to be a little bit of concern, and Oezdemir is the type of guy that if you make a mistake and he's able to connect, you're going to be in some serious trouble. Now, Rakic could look to fight long in this matchup and then, boom, close distance, look for takedowns like he did against Justin Ledet. Very real possibility. Volkan's counter-striking is going to be imperative to slow that down, and his improved takedown defense is also a crucial aspect of it. Now, look for Oezdemir to either land in round 1 and hurt him in an exchange, or put either one of those, another strong, more wide-open performance where he just doesn't blow guys out of the water with his volume, but it's just consistent, doing damage and getting the better of the exchanges over 3 rounds, or whatever it takes him to possibly finish him if he can get him before 3 rounds. It'll be superior striking pressure, and impact will be the keys for the Swiss fighter, but ultimately I think he gets him out of there. My prediction is Volkan Oezdemir to defeat Aleksandar Rakic by knockout. In the main event of the evening, former UFC lightweight champion, former UFC featherweight title challenger, the Frankie the Answer Edgar, currently ranked 4th in the division, 21 wins, 6 losses, and 1 draw, takes on the Korean zombie, the 6th-ranked Chen Jung, with a record of 14 wins and 4 defeats. And this fight was originally set to feature Zombie against Brian Ortega. T-City, I believe, was an ACL injury. Pulled out with about 3 weeks to prep for Frankie. Edgar was prepping for his bantamweight debut against Corey Sandhagen, which is supposed to go down in January, and the rumor is that fight is still scheduled to take place. So if that's the case, holy heck. Nonetheless, this fight's now booked. It was actually booked at one point in late 2018. These two were supposed to get together and never did. So it's fun to see it now. Edgar's coming off a title fight loss against Max Holloway, who just lost his title. He has now lost 5 straight UFC title fights. He's 3-2 over his last 5 matchups overall. For KZ, he had that TKO victory over Renato Moicano, knockout loss versus Yair Rodriguez in a fight that was very entertaining. He's 4-2 over his last 6, including a title fight loss to Jose Aldo. He had a massive gap in his between fights with a layoff military service he had to take part in for South Korea. Mandatory military service, which seems to slow fighters from that country down a little bit. Nonetheless, he's a guy who's right in the mix, especially the victory here in impressive fashion. Physically, Korean Zombie 1 inch taller, 4-inch reach advantage, and he's the younger man by 6 years. Now, Edgar's coming off a title fight loss. Post-title fight letdown. Now, we just came off an event in which Marlon Moraes and Jessica Ai both won fights in the post-title fight letdown scenario. Moraes arguably lost, and I lost the first round, and her opponent kind of shut down, and just her brain went for a shit, which cost her that matchup. So Edgar, when you look at his run, he's had a lot of experience losing title fights. He's 2-2 in the first fight after that title fight. He's an experienced fighter. You have to wonder if he's affected by losing championships because he's been so thorough in his career at getting back into contention. It's also worth noting, in his last 9 non-title fights, he's 8-1. He's like the new Uriah Faber. In fact, he beat Uriah Faber in one of those non-title fights. A guy who just can't seem to get back on top of the UFC and get a belt wrapped around his waist, but beats everybody else he faces. This could be the exception here. We'll have to wait and see. Now, how does the prep for bantamweight by Frankie impact him here? Prepping to cut, whether he was partially into the cut, it could be a distraction from training. It could impact his body. It could be a non-factor. That's a good question. He might not be into a mode yet where he's really doing too much because he's not a big man to start with. Now, it's also worth noting for Korean Zombies fighting at home for the first time in the UFC. That's huge. First time since 2008, which was the 6th pro fight of his career, the last time he was at home. So that's a massive scenario. Now, we've talked about whether it can be a distraction or an advantage. You're in a better spot than your opponents because you're comfortable, but you get family and friends wanting to talk to you, wanting to see you. You get a lot of news and media attention on you, so it's certainly a pressure situation. You need to be focused. Korean Zombie seems like that type of guy who's going to be very focused and dutiful to his profession, that it shouldn't bother him too much. Now, when you look back at his recent performances, he got knocked out by Yair Rodriguez. That a fight that I think he was winning. I had Rodriguez win that matchup, and I thought Zombie was going to get that on the scorecards. And now he stopped Moicano very impressively. I had Zombie in that matchup. Stopped Moicano in the first minute. I didn't expect him to do that. I thought he might stop him, but not like that. And then he stopped Bermudez in the first 3 minutes. Again, a fight I had him to win in that one as well. So he's had a tale of two cities: quick finishes, or I guess getting finished late in a very more complete performance, I would say. Now, Edgar, he has finishes on his record, but he's more of a decision-based fighter. He's going to outwork you, outscore you, and just put more points on you than you will, and he will take you on the cards in a lot of scenarios. Now, it is worth noting that Edgar has landed at least 1 takedown in 6 of his last 8 wins, more than 2 in 5 of those 6 wins, and 3+ 3 times, including game fights in which he landed 5, 5, and 7. So he averages 1 takedown per fight over his last 5 losses, so it shows you how important landing takedowns is for Frankie. And I'm not telling you anything new. We know he's a good fighter who benefits from being in top position, but at the same time, that shows a key aspect of this matchup. If the Korean Zombie can utilize his very strong takedown defense, his judo background, his jiu-jitsu, can he keep vertical? I think he very much can in this matchup. He's got a 75% takedown defense. He's only been taken down in 1 fight, which is Jose Aldo, kind of went off book and took him down multiple times back in 2013, so he's got good takedown defense. Now, if Frankie can't take Korean Zombie down, that limits one of his biggest weapons. Now, the size could be a factor, too, in this matchup, especially if Edgar, again, is cutting. He could be a little bit lighter than normal already, maybe not building up quite as much muscle, and if he can't muscle the Korean Zombie around, that takes away from that. Edgar uses pace and volume, though, when he's at his best, but he doesn't land as much as he used to, and he's still the type of guy who can be hit. And Korean Zombie can put up some big volume himself. He's durable. He hits very hard. And while Edgar is tough, he wears that damage. And we saw against Brian Ortega that there's a diminishing point of returns. And if you're going to get hit too much throughout your career, eventually it's going to catch up to you. And Ortega took him out, and we could see something, a growing trend here. I think Korean Zombie's reach and overall size will be, just his length will be a factor as Edgar tries to press forward and land with combinations without eating too much offense. Zombie puts on a good performance at home, I think, is what we're looking at here. A guy who's going to be hyped up to rise to the occasion. The short notice and travel will be concerning factors for Edgar. And I think this is one of those matchups where, again, we see why Frankie is making the move to bantamweight, because he's going to be a little bit undersized and just struggle overall with this situation. I think he's doing the UFC a huge solid in stepping up to keep the Korean Zombie on the card. And again, I think his focus will be in moving to 135 pounds after this. I think Zombie's going to actually catch him during the exchange. I think he could actually absolutely take him over 5 rounds. It's just one of those fights where Frankie just doesn't do enough and KZ just outworks him. But ultimately, I think we're going to see Zombie catch him. He's going to push hard. He's going to hurt him and get the finish. And my prediction is the Korean Zombie, Jung, to defeat Frankie Edgar by knockout. So those are my 6 main card predictions for UFC Fight Night 165. The last fight night, last event period of 2019. Again, we have a month off between events, so we get a little bit of a break, which again, hey, it's always appreciate when you get a break. Makes you want those fights that much more. We'll see how things plan out. Next time I'm talking to you is UFC 246, McGregor versus Cowboy. That's a huge fight. That's a great fight. Very much looking forward to it. And then we get on another stretch of what appears to be of a good number of fights in a row. We'll see how long that carries us, probably all the way into the summer, the way the UFC likes to do things. So again, you can follow me at Twitter, K_predictions. I need 9 wins, and I'll be counting that down, 9 wins to get to 300. I probably won't watch the event live. I'll probably wake up Saturday morning and check it out after it's happened. So I actually don't expect me to be on social media to avoid any spoilers. The bet packs will be posted ASAP along with my preliminary picks. As always, guys, I really appreciate you tuning in to this show and all year long, and for the last, it's almost 10 years now. Almost 10 years. We're creeping up in 10 years in business. I want to say I started in 2010, so we're right there. So happy holidays to you and your family, whatever you celebrate. Merry Christmas, Hanukkah, whatever it is you're out there celebrating. Happy New Year, and I will see you back here in 2020. Take care, folks. Enjoy the fights. Hi.